January 11th, 1944, over Oschersleben, Germany. A single American fighter pilot found himself alone in the sky, facing something no pilot should ever face, an entire swarm of enemy fighters. Not just a few, not a dozen, over 30 German Luftwaffe fighters descended on a formation of American bombers, and every escort fighter was either dead, gone, or running on fumes. Every single one of his squadron mates had been killed or separated. He was alone. What happened next lasted 30 minutes. 30 minutes where one man became a living shield for 30 bombers and 300 American airmen. 30 minutes that would earn him the Medal of Honor and the nickname that stuck for the rest of his life. But here's the thing nobody tells you. James Howard wasn't supposed to be in the Army Air Forces at all. He was Navy. He should have never been over Germany that day. And by every rational measure, he should have died before his guns even ran dry. Yet he didn't. This is the story of Major James Howell Howard, the man who became the only fighter pilot in the entire European theater to win the Medal of Honor. James Howard Howard was born on April 8, 1913 in Canton, China. Not in some wealthy colonial mansion, though his father had resources. He was born where his father worked. Dr. Harvey James Howard was an ophthalmologist, an eye surgeon. He had traveled to China as a medical missionary, not for glory, not for money, but because he believed his skills could heal people who had no access to good medical care. Young James grew up in that environment, a world where service mattered more than safety, where helping others was simply what you did. His childhood was unlike anything an American boy would normally experience. While kids back in St. Louis were playing baseball and doing normal American kid things, James was running through Chinese streets, learning Chinese culture, attending a colonial school where he was one of the only American children. His world changed in 1926 when his father was kidnapped. It was 1926. Manchurian bandits had targeted Dr. Harvey Howard, a foreign doctor, a man of means. They took him and his young son James, who was only 13 years old at the time. For 10 weeks they held the two Howards captive. 10 weeks of uncertainty. 10 weeks where a young boy had to watch his father, had to trust that somehow they would survive this. They did survive, both of them. But something had changed in James. He had seen danger. He had seen what could happen when the world turned violent, and he had survived it. In 1927, the family returned to the United States. They settled in St. Louis, Missouri. James was 14 years old, and for the first time in his life, he was being told he was American, not Chinese, not a colonial child, but American. At school, other kids called him China. It wasn't affectionate. It was a marking of difference, a reminder that he was other, that he didn't fit. But James learned quickly that being different wasn't a weakness. It was just who he was. He attended Haverford boarding school, then graduated and enrolled at Pomona College in California. He was planning to follow his father's footsteps, pre-med, medical school, a life of healing like his father. Then, in his senior year, everything changed. Flying. That's what captured James Howard's imagination. Not surgery, not medicine, but the sky. In 1937, at the age of 24, he changed his entire life path. Instead of going to medical school, he joined the Navy as an aviation cadet. He entered training at Pensacola, Florida in 1938. Of 140 applicants trying to become naval aviators, only 15 graduated. James Howard was one of them. He earned his wings in August 1939, just as the war in Europe was beginning. He was assigned to the USS Wasp with Fighting Squadron 7. For the first time in his life, he was where he belonged, in the sky, where the rules were clear, where it was just you, your plane, and the enemy. But the Navy couldn't hold James Howard for long. His path was about to take a turn that nobody could have predicted.
By 1940, the world was at war, but America wasn't, not yet. That was about to change. America was walking a dangerous line, officially neutral, unofficially deeply concerned about both Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. President Franklin Roosevelt wanted to help the British fight Hitler, but Congress would never approve a war. So what do you do when you want to help but can't officially help? You do it unofficially. The government created something that didn't officially exist, the American Volunteer Group. Pilots and aircraft taken from the regular military, Navy, Army, Air Corps, and given what was basically plausible deniability. They could go fight for China against the Japanese, but nobody could say they were there fighting a war. They were just volunteers. The catch? Howard had to turn down a regular commission in the Navy. A regular commission was a massive honor. It meant he was being offered a permanent officer's rank, something given to only one other ensign at the time. It was a career-making opportunity. He turned it down. He wanted to go back to China. He wanted to fly, and he wanted to fight. So, in 1941, James Howard became one of about 80 volunteer pilots flying P-40 Warhawks for the Flying Tigers in Burma and China. The P-40 was not a great aeroplane. It was slow, it was heavy. The Japanese Zero could outturn it, outclimb it, out-everything it. But the Flying Tigers had something the Japanese didn't: pilots who refused to quit. Over the next 11 months, James Howard flew combat missions over China and Burma. He became good at it, very good. By July 1942, when the Flying Tigers were disbanded, he had 6 confirmed kills against Japanese aircraft, 6 enemy planes shot down. 6, the number that would follow him for the rest of the war. His kills were clean. There was no wasted motion with Howard. He was precise, cold, efficient. A fellow pilot who flew with him later wrote, "He was a confident, expert dogfighter who could destroy enemy planes even while flying inverted." Flying inverted. That's not a skill most pilots develop. That requires absolute mastery of your aircraft, absolute confidence in yourself, absolute refusal to panic when everything is upside down and bullets are coming at you. By the time the AVG was disbanded, James Howard had proven something. He was one of the best fighter pilots in the world, not just American, in the world. But his war was just beginning.
In 1943, the Army Air Forces did something unusual. They recruited the best Flying Tigers pilots back into the service. James Howard was commissioned as a captain in the U.S. Air Forces and assigned to the 354th Fighter Group, an outfit that was deploying to England to fly long-range escort missions over Europe. The plane he would fly was unlike anything in the world at that moment, the North American P-51 Mustang. The Mustang was beautiful, sleek, fast. With the new Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, it could fly higher and faster than almost any other fighter in the world. More importantly, it could fly long distances, real long distances, hundreds of miles. It could protect bombers on deep strikes into Germany. But in early 1944, the P-51 was still new to Europe. The 8th Air Force was just beginning to figure out what it could do. Most bomber escort missions were still flown by P-47 Thunderbolts, which had to turn back when they ran low on fuel. The Mustang changed all that. Howard named his personal aircraft Ding Hao. It was Chinese slang, something like number one or the very best. The nose art showed his previous victories, 6 Japanese flags from his Flying Tigers service. He was ready to add to that count. By January 1944, Howard had been promoted to Major and given command of the 356th Fighter Squadron. He was 30 years old, in charge of dozens of pilots, all younger than him, all looking to him to bring them home alive. It was the responsibility he had trained for his entire life.
The morning of January 11th started like any other major bombing mission. The bombers, 525 B-17s and B-24s, were going to hit aircraft production facilities near Oschersleben and Halberstadt, about 100 miles southwest of Berlin. This was deep. This was far into Germany, and every pilot and gunner in that room knew what it meant. The Luftwaffe would be waiting. The German fighters would be there, and the Luftwaffe was getting desperate. Desperate pilots are the most dangerous kind. Major James Howard led 50 P-51 Mustangs of the 354th Fighter Group. 50 fighters to protect hundreds of bombers. It was the best ratio they could manage, but it was never enough. 50 fighters could never protect hundreds of bombers against an enemy that was willing to die to protect their homeland. The fighters launched first, climbing to altitude, forming up into their squadrons and flights. Howard's 354th climbed toward the bombers, Ding Hao at the lead. Behind them, the bombers were launching as well, slow, heavy, laden with bombs and ammunition and 10-man crews. They climbed slowly toward altitude, forming their combat boxes, tight defensive formations where every gun could cover every other bomber. The flight to the target took hours, hours where the pilots had to maintain formation, maintain altitude, maintain discipline while watching the German border get closer and closer. Around 11 a.m., the bombers reached the target area. The Oschersleben factory lay below. The bombing run began. Flak, anti-aircraft fire filled the sky. Hundreds of explosions, all trying to reach up and knock down American bombers. And that's when the Luftwaffe attacked. They came from everywhere. VF-190s, FW-190s, ME-110s, 2-engine fighters with devastating firepower. They came in pairs, in fours, in flights. They came from above, they came from below, they came from the sides, their cannons blazing. Howard was in his element. He had trained for this. He had done this over China. His instincts took over. He directed his squadrons to intercept the fighters. His first flight moved to engage a group of Me-110s. He locked onto one, fired, and watched it go down. But then everything went wrong. In the chaos of the fight, Howard lost contact with his flight. One moment he was leading. The next moment the enemy had broken the formation, and he was alone. His wingman was gone. The other fighters were gone. It was just James Howard in his P-51 surrounded by enemy fighters. Most pilots would have done the smart thing. Most pilots would have climbed, regrouped, tried to find friendly fighters. The smart move was to get out, regroup, and come back fighting. But James Howard wasn't most pilots. He looked down and saw the bombers. He saw 30 American B-17s of the 401st Bomb Group being attacked by more than 30 German fighters. He saw 300 American airmen in those bombers, 10 men in each plane, pilots and co-pilots and navigators and bombardiers and gunners and radio operators. And he saw no other American fighters. The P-47 Thunderbolts had already turned back. They were low on fuel and couldn't make the long flight home from this deep in Germany. Every other Mustang was either dead or fighting somewhere else. For those 300 men in the bombers, James Howard was the only thing standing between them and the Luftwaffe. He pushed the stick forward and dove. For the next 30 minutes, James Howard became a one-man air force. What happened next is almost impossible to believe. Not because it's unrealistic, it happened, but because it defied every rational expectation of what a single fighter pilot could do. Howard didn't try to hide. He didn't try to be tactical or clever. He attacked. He saw a formation of bombers being attacked from above. He climbed to meet the threat. A B-109 was diving on a B-17. Howard turned hard, cutting off the Germans' angle of attack. The 109 tried to pull away. Howard fired. The 109 exploded. Next target. A flight of Me-110s was swinging around for another pass. Me-110s were twin-engine fighters, heavy and powerful, with cannons and machine guns that could shred a B-17 in seconds. Howard locked onto the lead 110. He closed the distance, pouring fire into the enemy fighter. Smoke poured from the Me-110. Howard watched it go down. But there were always more. The German pilots realized what was happening. A lone American Mustang was harassing their entire formation. They organized a counterattack. Multiple fighters tried to sandwich Howard, to get on his tail, to kill him. This is where Howard's experience mattered. He had flown over China against the Zero, the most maneuverable fighter in the world. He had survived. The B-109 was fast, but it wasn't Zero. The FW-19 was tough, but Howard knew how to fight it. He used his speed. He used his altitude. When German fighters tried to turn with him, he would convert that into a climbing turn, gaining height, gaining advantage. Then he would dive back down on another target. Back and forth, up and down, around and around, for 30 minutes. One bomber crew later reported watching a single P-51 carve a shield around their formation. Over and over, that one Mustang would break up an attack, scatter the German fighters, then reform to meet the next wave. One B-17 tail gunner watched in disbelief as an FW-190 set up for a perfect diving attack on the bomber formation. The German pilot was lined up perfectly. In another second, the 19's 20mm cannons would tear through the bombers. Then, the lone Mustang appeared. Howard came from nowhere, cutting across the 19's path, forcing the German pilot to break off his attack. The 19 pilot panicked. Instead of continuing the attack or trying to fight, he did something desperate. He bailed out. He ejected from his fighter and jumped, preferring to become a prisoner rather than risk fighting the Mustang pilot. That tells you everything you need to know about what was happening. German pilots, trained, experienced, desperate to protect their homeland, were choosing to surrender rather than face this one man. 30 minutes. The entire time Howard's ammunition was running out. He had 400 rounds per gun, 4 guns, 1,600 rounds total to defend 30 bombers and 300 men. 3 of his 4 guns jammed. Whether from the extreme G-forces of the maneuvers or from combat damage, he didn't have time to analyze. He only had 1 gun left. 1 gun, 100 rounds. But he kept going. He kept making passes. He kept pressing attacks. And when his ammunition finally ran dry, when that last gun went click on empty, he didn't leave. Howard continued to make dummy passes at the German fighters. He would dive at them, line them up in his sights, and pull the trigger on an empty gun. The German pilots didn't know it was empty. They didn't know they were being attacked by an aircraft with no weapons left. All they saw was the Mustang coming at them, and they broke off their attacks. Psychology, nerve, sheer audacity. That's what won that battle when bullets ran out. One of the bomber formation leaders, Major Allison Brooks, later said it was the greatest display of flying courage he had ever witnessed. One fighter, outnumbered 4-1, defending the bombers against an enemy swarm for half an hour, alone, with no support, watching his ammunition run dry and continuing anyway. When it was finally over, when the German fighters broke off and turned for home, the bombers began their journey back to England. James Howard flew alongside them, his guns empty, his fuel running low, his P-51 with nothing left to give. But he had done it. He had saved those bombers. He had saved those men. And then something miraculous happened. Despite 30 minutes of intense combat, despite being outnumbered 30-1, despite attacking continuously, James Howard's P-51 had been hit exactly once. One bullet hole. A stray .50 caliber round from a B-17 waist gunner, probably meant to be helpful. One hole. 30 minutes of combat, outnumbered 30-1. That was how good he was.
When James Howard landed at RAF Boxstead, the base erupted. Bomber crews who had been debriefed were still talking about it. The same question repeated over and over. Who was that P-51 pilot? The one flying AJA? The one who stayed with us? The Army had to launch an investigation to figure out which pilot it was. The Mustang was coded AJA, but in the chaos of the mission and the loss of so many aircraft, they couldn't immediately identify which of the hundreds of pilots flying that day had done the impossible. By the next day, the story had reached military headquarters. General Jimmy Doolittle, who had just taken command of the 8th Air Force, wanted answers. When he learned it was Major James Howard of the 354th Fighter Group, he made sure everyone knew about it. The New York Times ran the story, Major James Howell Howard identified today as the lone United States fighter pilot who for more than 30 minutes fought off about 30 German fighters trying to attack 8th Air Force B-17 formations returning from Oschersleben. The articles had headlines like Mustang Whip and One-Man Air Force. CBS correspondent Andy Rooney, then a reporter for Stars and Stripes, called it the greatest fighter pilot story of World War II. And the military was listening. On June 5, 1944, James Howard was promoted to lieutenant colonel, and more importantly, he was presented with the Medal of Honor by Lieutenant General Karl Spaatz, one of the highest-ranking officers in the European theatre. The citation read, "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity above and beyond the call of duty in action with the enemy near Oschersleben, Germany, on 11 January 1944. He was 31 years old, one of only 2 fighter pilots in the entire European theatre to receive the Medal of Honor, the only 8th Air Force fighter pilot to ever receive it. But here's what's remarkable. James Howard didn't consider himself a hero. When a reporter asked him why he had taken such an insane risk, why he had attacked 30 fighters with 1 Mustang and no support, Howard replied simply, "I seen my duty and I done it." That's all. Not a heroic declaration, not a speech about honor and sacrifice, just, "I seen my duty and I done it." That was James Howard.
James Howard continued to fly combat missions for the rest of the war. On January 30th, he shot down another Bf-110 over Brunswick. On April 8, 1944, he shot down an FW-190 over Brunswick. He flew 107 combat missions in total, 67 with the Flying Tigers and 40 with the 8th Air Force. He became an ace in 2 different theaters, flying 2 different aircraft types against 2 different enemies. But more than his combat record, what stands out is his consistency. Howard never seemed to lose his nerve. He never seemed to panic. He was exactly the same in his last mission as he was in his first. Controlled, precise, deadly. He was promoted to full colonel on November 25, 1945, and relieved from active duty. He had done his part. He had done more than his part. And then he did something that defines him more than any medal ever could. James Howard could have ridden that Medal of Honor for the rest of his life. He could have done speaking tours, written books, cashed in on his fame and his heroism. Instead, he went back to work. He became the director of aeronautics for the city of St. Louis, managing Lambert Field. He founded a company called Howard Research, which specialized in systems engineering for the defense industry. It became so successful that he eventually sold it to Control Data Corporation.
He got married, he had a family, he lived a quiet life. He was exactly like the boy from China who had turned down a regular commission in the Navy, driven, ambitious, but not looking for glory. In 1991, when he was 78 years old, he finally wrote his autobiography, Roar of the Tiger. It's a fascinating book, full of stories from his flying career, full of insights into what it takes to be a fighter pilot at the highest level. He never bragged, he never claimed credit for things he hadn't done. He told the stories simply, factually, as if he was just reporting on events that had happened to be historically significant. That was James Howard. He moved to Florida and lived quietly until March 18, 1995, when he passed away at the Veterans Affairs Medical Center in Bay Pines. He was 82 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, one of the highest honors the nation can give. His grave marker carries his name, his rank, his dates, and the Medal of Honor insignia. But his real legacy isn't on a gravestone. It's in the history books. It's in the bomber crews who lived because of what he did. It's in the families of those 300 men who came home because of those 30 minutes. James Howell Howard lived in a way that most of us will never understand. He was born in a foreign country to American parents who chose service over comfort. He was kidnapped by bandits and survived. He turned down guaranteed success to follow his passion for flying. He volunteered to fight in a secret war that didn't officially exist. And when the moment came, when he had a choice between the smart move and the right move, he chose the right move. He attacked 30 fighters alone. CBS correspondent Andy Rooney called it the greatest fighter pilot story of World War II. That was in 1944. 80 years later, it still holds up. Because Howard's story isn't really about dogfighting or tactics or aerial combat skills. It's about what happens when a man decides that other people matter more than his own safety. For 30 minutes, James Howard placed himself between 300 men and death. And he did it without hesitation, without second-guessing, without looking for recognition. The boy from China who called himself American, the Navy pilot who fought for the Army Air Forces, the flying tiger turned Mustang ace, the greatest fighter pilot of his generation. He was many things, but above all he was someone who, when the moment came, when everything was on the line, when the stakes couldn't possibly be higher, he answered the call.